and start admitting everyone.
Good evening and welcome. Ms. Sandra Maynard, Pro Vice Chancellor of Global Affairs, who is representing the Vice Chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, who is unable to attend and sends his apologies, is currently on her way in traffic. We hope to welcome her soon. Dr. Emily Dickford, Deputy Principal of the UWI Global Campus, Dr. David Smith, Director, Center for Environmental Management Coordinator, Institute for Sustainable Development of the University of the West Indies, and our special guest speaker, Dr. Charlie, Executive Director, Global Institute for Climate Smart and Resilient Development, Dr. Cook Douglas, Director, Center for Biosecurity Studies at the UWI Cave Hill campus, Mrs. Celia Davidson Francis, Director of Alumni Relations, Regional Director of UWI Responsible Futures, Founder and Coordinator of UW-STAT's Ambassadorial Corps and Young Alumni Advocates, Ms. Nisha Manikchand, Project and Resource Mobilization Officer, Global Institute for Climate Smart and Resilient Development, campus alumni, officers and assistants, UWI-STAT presidents and ambassadors, and guild presidents and council presidents, UWI students, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and a warm welcome is extended to you to our SDG 101 Forum 2.0. I am sure that you will all agree that the biggest threat that we are facing today is climate change. Hence, the timely topic for this forum, understanding the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and our responsibility. We need to ensure that we are knowledgeable, proactive, and resilient. I am Christiana Paul, your Master of Ceremonies, and I'm delighted to invite our UWI-STAT Global Campus President, Ambassador Erica Clover-Joseph, to give us the formal welcome.
Thank you, Christiana. Good afternoon and welcome. Ms. Sandra Maynard, Pro Vice Chancellor, Global Affairs, Dr. Emily Dickford, Deputy Principal, the UWI Global Campus, Dr. John Charlie, Executive Director, Global Institute for Climate Smart and Resilient Development, Ms. Nisha Manikchand, Project and Resource Mobilization Officer, Global Institute for Climate Smart Resilience and Development, Dr. Kirk Douglas, Director, Center for Biosecurity Studies, the UWI Cave Hill Campus, Mrs. Celia Davidson Francis, Director of Alumni Relations, Regional Director of UWI Responsible Futures, Founder and Coordinator, UWI-STAT Ambassadorial Corps and Young Alumni Advocates, Campus Alumni Officers and Assistants, UWI-STAT Presidents and Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the SDG 101 Forum 2.0, hosted by the UWI Global Campus STAT Corps. This evening, we gather under the inspiring theme, Understanding the SDGs and our Responsibilities. As we embark on this journey of exploration and enlightenment, it is crucial to recognize the significance of the Sustainable Development Goals. These 17 goals, established by the United Nations, serve as a blueprint for achieving a better and more sustainable future for all. They address global challenges such as poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental environmental degradation, peace, and injustice. Our theme, Understanding the SDGs and Our Responsibility, underscores the importance of not only comprehending these goals, but also recognizing the role each of us play in advancing them. As members of the UWI Global Campus, we are uniquely positioned to drive positive change across the Caribbean and beyond. Our collective efforts, rooted in education, collaboration, and innovation, can significantly contribute to the achievement of these global objectives. Tonight's forum is an opportunity for us to deepen our understanding of the SDGs, share insight, and discuss actionable items we can take to contribute to their realization. It is a chance for us to reflect on our responsibilities as individuals, as students, and as leaders within our communities. By fostering a culture of sustainability and social responsibility, we can help create a world where everyone thrives. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to our speaker for the insight he will bring tonight. Your commitment to promoting sustainable development is truly inspiring. As we proceed with our discussions tonight, let us remember that every action, no matter how small, can make a difference. Together, we can build a future that is inclusive, equitable, and sustainable for all. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to a productive and enlightening forum.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, President Ambassador Erica. Also, let me recognize Ms. Sandra Maynard, Pro Vice Chancellor, who is on call with us right now. Happy to have you with us and engage with you throughout the forum. So let us welcome now the Regional Director for UWI Responsible Futures to give us remarks. Mrs. Davidson Francis is the founder of UWI Stats, under whose remit the Responsible Futures lie.
Thank you very much, Christiana. I'm delighted to be here, and I would like also to acknowledge all those present. I ask your permission to stand on the existing protocol as you have been introduced and acknowledged by both our moderator and the president. I would just, however, like to thank PVC Sandra Maynard for being here and representing the VC. And it's very appropriate that she is here because she is the Pro Vice Chancellor of Global Affairs, and she is the person who got us all involved in Responsible Futures. So we're very happy to have her here. In addition, of course, our guest speaker, members of the Advisory Board for Responsible Futures, Dr. Emily Dick-Ford, Dr. John Charlery, Dr. Kirk Douglas, and Ms. Nisha Manikchand, as well as, of course, all of our students in their various capacities, UWI Stat, the Guild, and of course, our campus alumni officers and assistants, ladies and gentlemen, and UWI students all. It's my pleasure to be talking to you this evening about Responsible Futures. And let me just ensure that presentation is up and share it with you. To begin, is everybody seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay,
yes, please.
wonderful, wonderful. Okay. So this afternoon, I'm going to be speaking about understanding the Sustainable Development Goals and our responsibility from a responsible futures perspective. Now, UWI is the first university in the Caribbean to be invited to be part of the Responsible Futures program, which is an IAU, which stands for International Association of Universities, and SOS, which stands for Students Organizing for Sustainability program. And you may ask why UWI has been chosen for this. And it's because of our reputation as an SDG engaged university with expertise and a focus on Caribbean sustainable development, as well as UWI's leadership in the Global University Consortium on the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 13, climate action. Now, Responsible Futures is a student-driven program, and the UWI Stat Ambassadorial Corps, having an established reputation for climate action and advocacy, along with the Guild of Students, was selected to lead UWI students towards the UWI's sustainability and SDG goals. The Corps will be responsible for audits and making sure that UWI is on track. And UWI Stat was actually, as I mentioned before, selected by PBC Sandria Maynard, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Global Affairs, to be the student group to do this. And we have the full support of the Vice Chancellor. So just quickly to look at the operational structure, as you see in the green to the right, Responsible Futures falls under the Office of Global Affairs, and we have an advisory board made up of experts in all fields to do with sustainable development and more. And in the gray area to the left, you'll see that the purpose of Responsible Futures is to embed and mainstream sustainability and resilience in curricula, non-curricula, operations, infrastructure, transportation, procurement, in fact, in everything that we do. And in the center, in the blue, you'll see that it is student-driven. So the Regional and Ambassadorial Corps is in charge of Responsible Futures and is guided by the following teams. We have a Responsible Futures Stat Leadership Council made up of 7 members, a Leadership Assembly of 15 ambassadors, our guild presidents, and of course their councils, as well as all UWI Stat ambassadors and ambassadors designate. These 4 groups know about Responsible Futures and can guide and advise and involve the UWI student population. Responsible Futures vision is to empower all UWI stakeholders to become catalysts for positive societal change. So all members of the UWI community, students, faculty and staff, management, administrators, alumni, alumni ambassadors, are all part of the Responsible Futures journey towards sustainability. And you can see all 5 campuses and the regional headquarters depicted here, showing total involvement. UWI is an SDG engaged university, as I've said, and I've also indicated the areas we're going to be really focusing on as a university and trying to support sustainability and the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. In doing so, I'd just like to highlight a few. Climate action, number 13, of course. Number 5, gender equality, being a woman, of course. And number 1, no poverty. I think we would all like to see that done away with in the world. And most of all, number 16, peace and justice, which is something that is badly needed at present. Okay, next slide. So our goals, the responsibility of the UWI as a tertiary institution is to teach students to learn and lead as the next generation of leaders in a climate change impacted world. The UWI aims to act as a change catalyst to advance sustainability in a total institution approach, as I've said before, and align all of its activities with 17 SDGs to positively impact one or more of the following. And those listed bullets are the 17 SDGs. So what we do in Responsible Futures is to aim to improve these in all that we do. Each individual can, in their work at UWI, and in their lectures, and hopefully at home as well, can choose one or more to target in everything they do. So you start to think in the sustainable way, saying, what am I doing? Whether it be for work or pleasure, is this the best way to do it for the planet and the future? So at the student level, I wanted to give some examples as to how students can help to integrate Responsible Futures into their lives. So if we take residence halls, for example, we could say they could be impacted by number 7, which is affordable and clean energy. And how could they do this? By conserving energy, turning off lights, and implementing energy efficient practices. In lectures, how could students help? By responsible consumption and using digital notes and reducing paper usage. In law, They could look at gender equality and how this impacts law, and also in terms of how law can reduce inequalities. Number 10, in medicine, medical sciences overall, good health and well-being by using eco-friendly lab materials and disposing of medical waste via eco-friendly mechanisms. In language studies, number 16, peace by promoting cross-cultural understanding, which language enables so that people understand and there's less conflict, which leads to peace. In engineering, affordable and clean energy can be advocated for by renewable energy solutions. In social sciences, in governance and public policy, to reduce inequalities and promote justice in governance. In sports, you could promote recycling programs in all sports facilities. So all games would have no plastic bottles. Everybody would be encouraged to bring reusable bottles, for example. And in humanities, by exploring philosophical perspectives on environmental ethics, for example, to promote justice and strong institutions. At the campus level, we could look at operations, waste management, and procurement. These three affect that I have up here: operations, sustainable suppliers, and sustainable purchasing policies, impact number 7, which is energy, number 11, which is sustainable communities and cities, and number 12, which is waste management. And if we look at operations, we could think about things like making sure all our buildings are energy efficient, having water conservation programs, waste reduction strategies to reduce the university's environmental footprint. Also ensure that all buildings have solar panels and promote recycling programs. In terms of food, we could offer locally sourced food options to reduce the carbon footprint associated with food supplies, and in this way, we would also support our local farmers. Additionally, reducing food waste could be done through composting programs. And in terms of sustainable purchasing, policies which prioritize environmentally friendly and ethically sourced products could be the ones that we aim for. Of course, life is not without challenges, and neither is Responsible Futures. So 2 things that we need to improve on are budget and financing, which the Office of Global Affairs will be helping with, as well as we hope students being enthusiastic and finding all kinds of innovative ways to make things happen. And coordination issues, we do tend still to work in silos rather than working together. So we want to focus on better coordination and collaboration across the 5 campuses and communication, so we all know what we're doing. We can share best practices and work together towards the common goal of a responsible future. How will we going to demonstrate impact? We have started the Responsible Futures journey. We started last year putting in the groundwork, and this year we are going to be continuing our expansion. We did take part in a minimal way in the teach-in March, where we started to introduce lecturers to the idea that UWI is part of Responsible Futures and to open their minds to seeing how they could integrate sustainability and the SDG focus into what they're teaching. We did have a great response, or the highest response, from St. Augustine campus. So those of you from St. Augustine, yay! And as of September, we will also be letting incoming students know that we are a sustainable institution. So that is something to look forward to. As you'll see on screen, the annual audit will be done by students. So students will monitor our progress and keep everyone, executive and campus management included, apprised of what is going on and how we are making progress under each SDG on each campus. In terms of civic engagement, the directors of student services of all 5 campuses are very, very enthusiastic about creating a framework within which to focus on clubs and societies, and I have done a strategic plan which has been accepted. And basically every club and society will fit under one of the 17 SDGs in terms of how you're helping society with your service and volunteerism projects. And they have also agreed to incorporate in their orientation exercise a video that will be done by UWI Stat students, a short video, 2 or 3 minutes, followed by the pledge, sustainability pledge, which will be signed electronically. And we hope in this way, even though it is mostly symbolic, it will open incoming students' minds to the fact that their institution is a leader in sustainability and SDGs, that they'll be hearing more about it, and maybe raise their awareness levels and increase their interaction and action in this field. And finally, a recognition program, which will be done via social media and in UWI publications, and hopefully eventually in mainstream media, and some awards. And this will, of course, help with awareness and visibility. And if you have any ideas to help with the recognition program, please do send them in. We're always open to new ideas. And finally, I would just like to summarize to say that the Sustainable Development Goals provide a comprehensive framework for addressing our regional challenges in climate change. And climate change impacts all of the other SDG goals. When we have no water, no food, it's too hot to even think or too cold to survive. It doesn't matter what other problems we have. So UWI has a pivotal role in preparing students to become leaders in a climate change impacted world. And by supporting the Responsible Futures program, committing to a whole institution approach, the university can mainstream sustainability into all aspects of its teaching, learning, operations, and culture. This commitment will not only enhance the university's sustainability, but also equip students with the knowledge, skills, and values needed to create a more sustainable and responsible future for the Caribbean. So thank you for listening about UWI's Responsible Futures journey. And I am going to be handing back over to the chair and looking forward to our main presentation, which I know will be very insightful and informative. So thank you for your attention. And I believe you have an interesting video and some other things to happen before you hear the main presentation. So over to you, Christiana.
Yes, thank you so much for that presentation, Mrs. Francis. Particularly, I'm sure a lot of us on call were more interested in learning more about what the Responsible Futures initiative entails. And as a UWI student myself, I was particularly excited to learn that UWI was one of the first schools to be chosen to be a part of this initiative. And that really and truly at the heart of the Responsible Futures initiatives are the students who are proactively pushing all 17 SDGs. So I believe Mr. Joshua Bishop from the Global Campus Office will be sharing with us also the Global Campus Alumni Officer's support for the Responsible Futures initiative. Oh, Joshua, I believe you.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you, Christiana. Allow me to commence by offering apologies on behalf of Mrs. Sandra Griffith-Carrington, the campus alumni officer for the global campus, who unfortunately is not able to attend. But permit me to read the CAOs, the campus alumni officers from across the campus's support for the Responsible Futures. So, on behalf of the global campus officers for alumni relations, under whose remit the UWI Stat Court falls, we offer our unwavering support to the Responsible Futures program. This program seeks to mobilize students to demand from their universities a holistic reassessment of their operations by embedding sustainability and resilience in learning and teaching, core curricular activities, operations, and infrastructure at their universities. And this is all to combat climate change. Climate change is undeniably one of the greatest existential threats to the entire world. Its effects are already visible and are anticipated to be disproportionately felt in regions like the Caribbean. Furthermore, the long-term ramifications of climate change are expected to be disastrous for all humankind. It is therefore commendable that the University of the West Indies, which is the first university in the Caribbean to join the Responsible Futures Program, continues its efforts in combating climate change by widening the scope of students' involvement as led by the regional UWI Stat Corps. The CAOs, the campus alumni officers from across the campuses, therefore readily embrace the principles of the Responsible Future Program and are eager to support the UWI Stat Ambassadorial Corps in their efforts to be agents of positive change, not only in the university, but also in the Caribbean and the wider world. So that was the message from the campus alumni officers from across the campus. And now permit me to share a video of some of our ambassadors from the Global Campus UWI Stat Corps offering their support and sharing why sustainability is important in their respective areas of study.
I am an education leadership student at the University of the West Indies. Of course, I value sustainability. Education is not just about imparting knowledge. It is about preparing future generations to navigate and positively impact the world they inherit. Sustainability education is integral to this mission as it equips students with the understanding, skills, and mindset needed to address environmental, social, and economic challenges responsibly. By fostering sustainability consciousness in education, we empower students to become agents of positive change, ensuring a brighter and more sustainable future for all.
Of course, I am practicing sustainability in finance. As a final year student at the University of the West Indies Global Campus, my aim is to ensure that I incorporate a framework that encompasses environmental and social introspection on all financial decisions that I undertake. This practice would lead to a more sustainable financial position on all my investment activities in the long term.
Hi there, I'm Christiana Paul, Vice President of the Disaster Mitigation and Climate Change Committee at UWI Stat Global Campus, and I'm also a University of the West Indies Business and Entrepreneurship student. So of course sustainability matters, and I support the Responsible Futures initiative. In the world of business, especially focusing on social entrepreneurship, integrating sustainability into business models is imperative because it builds resilience, competitive advantage, as well as positively contributes to the society and the planet. What is the value of a business if it can't positively impact the environment and the market it serves? Thank you, Mr. Bishop, for your presentation, and pleased to hear the support from the campus alumni officers as well as fellow UWI Stat ambassadors. I now invite our president, Mrs. Erica Clover-Joseph, to introduce our expert presenter, Dr. David Smith.
Thank you. Dr. Smith coordinates the Institute for Sustainable Development at the University of the West Indies. He is a member of the Science Policy Advisory Committee for the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research and the Caribbean Chair for the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He was an author of the Global Sustainable Development Report 2019. His PhD is from the University of the West Indies. He works on environmental management, managing disaster risk, and the effects of climate change on human well-being in small island developing states. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome Dr. David Smith.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. and thanks very much for the invitation. I'm going to be talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and our responsibilities with regard to those goals. So I'll start out first of all with the goals themselves. If you look on the right side of the screen, that's the 17 goals, and we should try to remember which ones they are and which ones are most important to us. The image on the left is the front page of the Global Sustainable Development Report of 2019, where myself and 14 other scientists were appointed by the UN Secretary General to take a look at how the world is moving towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So the world agreed to go towards the goals in 2015. 4 years later, we took stock of how well the world was doing. And we found that there were 4 major barriers that were stopping the world from moving as quickly as it would like. One was waste, one was inequality, one was climate change, and the other biodiversity loss. And those work together to frustrate the efforts of the world, of the different countries of the world, to move towards sustainability. And how that happens is interesting and happens in different ways. So let's take waste, for example. One of the most typical things that we in human society do is throw things away. We very often throw things into the nearest river. River flows into the sea, so it carries the waste that we threw away, or the gully that we throw it away into the sea, and it ends up in the oceans. One of the things that we're realizing now is that what ends up in the oceans often ends up in the diet of fish. And while it may not necessarily kill the fish, when we eat those fish, it ends up in us as well. So one of the things that we know now is that microplastics, which of course are obviously human-made, are part of the human diet. And we have incontrovertible evidence that the human diet includes microplastics. And we get those microplastics from eating marine animals that eat the plastics, and then we eat those marine animals. Inequality increases after repeated adverse events. So work has shown that, for example, in the southern United States, when they have repeated hurricanes, then inequality increases, and particularly in the southern United States, inequality between people of African origin and people who are not of African origin increases as well. Climate change drives increased adverse events. And biodiversity loss, and most biodiversity loss is really humans either eating or destroying biodiversity, that increases our vulnerability and also the number of adverse events as well. And the more adverse events we have, that increases inequality. And then inequality increases after repeat adverse events, and we continue round and round and round in a cycle. And the end result is that as we increase inequality, we increase our vulnerability and we decrease human and social capital. In 2023, a new independent group of scientists produced another report to see how well we were doing now 8 years or so after the beginning of the world's pledge to move towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And interestingly enough, a scientist from the University of the West Indies was in the 2023 report as well. So the University of the West Indies has had people in the 2019 and 2023 report. What they found in 2023 was that we were far off track on the way towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Only 2 of the 36 targets that were reviewed are actually on track, and 8 were actually going in the wrong direction. In terms of our overall score, this is looking at the world, or a piece of the world, and it's color-coded to show which countries are doing reasonably well in terms of moving towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So the darker the blue, the better the country is doing. Gray countries, there's an information deficit. So we don't have enough information to be able to tell whether they're moving forward or not. You should note that many of the small island developing states, or SIDS as we sometimes refer to them, particularly the ones in the Caribbean, are gray. That's a problem because it means that we're not collecting enough information to know how well or how badly we may be doing in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the goals is to eliminate hunger. And this is a map to show all the countries that have eliminated hunger within their populations. And all those countries that are green have eliminated hunger. And if you look carefully, you won't see any green countries. What you will see are different shades of orange and red, which indicate a relative level of problems or distance to go in order to ensure zero hunger. So note also that the OECD countries are all either in red or orange, despite the fact that they are the OECD countries. And if we look at good health and well-being, the situation isn't that much better. And you'll notice as well, where this is focusing on the Americas, that there aren't too many countries that are doing particularly well. Many of them are under the challenges remain, or significant challenges, or major challenges remain, which is of course not good. The authors of the 2030 report indicate that basically at the rate of progress that we're making at the moment, we're not going to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. They indicated that at the end of the decade, instead of having achieved the goals, there will be 575 million people living in extreme poverty, 600 million people facing hunger, and 84 million children and young people not in school. So that's quite the opposite of what we're trying to do. So here's a little quiz for you. Continuing the quote from the 2023 report, humanity will overshoot the Paris Climate Agreement's 1.5 goal, and we know that. As SIDS, we keep talking about 1.5 to stay alive, but we also know that we're going to overshoot the 1.5. What I'd like you to do, though, is, because I understand that you have access to the chat, would you please put into the chat what you think X is, and I'll read it for you. It says, and at the current rate, it will take X years to attain gender equality. So please enter into the chat what you think the X number is. How many years before we attain gender equality? Okay, so I'm seeing some people have said 30, 25, 15. Let me just, before anybody else enters, you're not using enough digits. So please continue. Okay, somebody's put in 100, 100, 100. You're still not using, well, you are using enough digits now. Okay. Taveen, Cyrus, Sims, Tyson, you are closer than anybody else. Yes, Brianna, you got it. So everybody please check and see what Brianna said. She's not particularly optimistic, but she is correct. The answer is 300. In addition to missing the goal of treating half the population as if they were equal to the other half of the population, we've missed goals on 6 of 9 planetary boundaries. What are planetary boundaries? Scientists have got together and figured out what is the safe operating space for humanity. One of the things that we need to bear in mind is that Earth itself is in no danger whatsoever, no matter what it is that humans do. Earth will persist. What won't persist are the conditions under which human life may persist. And the work done by Richardson et al., and Richardson was one of the scientists in the first group, have indicated that out of the 9 planetary boundaries that they've defined, 6 of them have been crossed so far. We should be very concerned about biosphere integrity. We should also be concerned about the atmosphere. We should also be very concerned about ocean acidification. Because what this means is that we're beginning to move out of where it's safe for humanity. And we should be particularly concerned about the tipping points for tropical coral reefs and tropical forests. The McKay paper, which came out in 2022, talks about, let's say, bad things that are likely to happen as we continue to warm the planet. One of them is low latitude coral reef die-off. And what that's referring to is what is likely to happen once we hit more than 1.5 degrees above historical values, then 1.9, and then 2 degrees. And I'll explain that in a moment. This picture shows what are the likely problems that we're going to experience. And you should be concerned about low latitude coral reefs, but you should also be concerned about the dieback of the Amazon forest, because that's likely to affect people in the Caribbean as well. So currently the world is heading towards 2 to 3 degrees of global warming. And if we actually agree and do all the things that we said we were going to do in terms of pledges, then we could reach just below 2 degrees. Now, this is taken from 2 papers. One is McKay et al. And the other one is Huff-Gilbert. The paper, the second one, you should note that M. Taylor, that's Professor Michael Taylor, who is currently the Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at the University of the West Indies, is one of the authors of this. And you should also bear in mind that it's highly likely that the University of the West Indies has more members of the IPCC than any other university on the planet. The tipping points. Well, if we hit 1.5 degrees above historical values, we'll lose between 70 and 90% of coral reefs around the world. If we hit 2 degrees, we'll likely lose over 99% of coral reefs around the world. This means that a major source for fishing would be lost or highly degraded, and most of the source of sand for beaches in the tropics, or at least in the tropical islands, is likely to be gone as well. That's not good because most tropical SIDS base their economy almost entirely on white sand beach tourism. In terms of the Amazon rainforest, when we hit 3.5 degrees, so this is not something we have to worry about right now, the Amazon rainforest will suffer from declining rainfall, longer dry seasons, and probably tip to become a degraded forest or a savanna. Some scientists are measuring the Amazon at the moment and believe that it is very close to the point, if not at the point, where it's no longer a carbon sink. Now, that's just the climate change, but we do have to worry about other things. Yes, climate change, but also the geological, anthropogenic, and biological hazards which we are subject to. And also the economic problems, things like changes in the policies of the OECD countries or of the BRICS, recessions in other countries, war, the changes in oil prices, changes in tariffs, and so on and so forth. Things like global pandemics and so on will affect the quality of our lives. The example I've given here of the South Atlantic seaweed on Caribbean and Mesoamerican beaches. This is a picture of a beach in Antigua. And as you know, Antigua is on the world stage right now because the SIDS conference, or the Conference on Sustainable Development in Small Island Developing States, is taking place at the moment. This is a beach in Antigua. The beach is actually underneath all that brown stuff, and the brown stuff is sargassum. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Small island developing states are vulnerable to international crises, mainly because of our dependence on the international trade system, remittances, and tourism. We're not the only countries in Latin America that are highly dependent on remittances, tourism, and international trade, but we do need to start looking at how our economies are built up and start to wean ourselves or broaden our economies so we can become more resilient. Part of the problem is, of course, this inequality thing. It's not just inequality by itself, but climate change and the way it affects countries is also unequal. And new climates will first appear in the tropics, usually probably around the year 2038, depending on where you are. But the work that was done on this indicated that Kingston in Jamaica was likely to experience new climates or essentially be warmer than it had been up until the year 2015. In the year 2023, that was of course last year. So the work that was done from University of Hawaii assumes or has done the measurements and figured out that it's likely that Kingston will be forever warmer and permanently warmer in terms of its annual average temperatures. What we do know, though, is temperatures are already higher in the tropics and subtropical countries. Rainfall patterns are changing. Major hurricanes in the Atlantic basin are becoming more frequent. That doesn't mean we're having more hurricanes, just more major ones. And we also know that the ocean is more acidic than it ever was prior to 2008. It became more acidic than historical values some time ago. So in the words of the Commonwealth Secretariat, climate change poses an existential threat. In this particular case, they were simply talking about Jamaica, but it applies to most small island developing states. It's an existential threat to our standard of living in Jamaica and our way of life. As an example, 20% of national climate losses are due to extreme weather and how it affects agriculture. So this could be heavy rain or unseasonal rain or drought. It just stops raining, or wind or tropical storms or hurricanes or high temperatures. I'm not going to say much about tropical cyclones because we spend a lot of time in the Caribbean talking about cyclones. The main reason for this is it's a picture of Dominica, and this is the airport, for those of you who didn't recognize the airport in Dominica. And we do need to bear in mind that while tropical cyclones are quite rightly taking a lot of our attention, let's not for 1 minute think that tropical cyclones are the only manifestation of climate change. So when getting back to how we think about these sustainable development goals, this is a picture of how the SIDS around the world were moving towards the sustainable development goals. Green is good, all the other colors are not so good, and gray means we simply don't know enough to say whether we're doing well or not. The arrows indicate whether the country is improving, stagnating, or going in the wrong direction entirely. So down arrows mean we're moving in the wrong direction. Up arrows mean we're moving in the right direction. Horizontal arrows mean we're holding steady. So how do we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? One of the problems is that we should not be focusing on the 17 goals individually. One of the things that we pointed out back in the 2019 report, and it was revisited in 2023, is if you focus on individual goals, you won't achieve them. The reason for that is the goals are interlinked. If you start to move heavily on, let's say, the goal of feeding everybody, you're very likely to create problems in terms of, for example, the goal of providing water for everybody. And you've got to be very conscious of the linkages between the goals and be very conscious that by ignoring the linkages, you could be causing problems. So you've got to look out for the positive linkages and try and maximize them as much as possible, and beware of the negative linkages and be conscious of those, so that when you're pursuing goals which might have negative linkages to other goals, you're conscious of this and you take precautions to make sure that you're not fighting against yourself. So what did we suggest you do instead? One was to use levers. These are the entries down the side, cross-cutting ways of working, whether it be governance, looking at the economy and finance, individual action, collective action, the use of science, absolutely vital, and also building capacity. And then across the top, instead of focusing on goals, focus on entry points. We need to focus, for example, on the global environmental commons. What are the commons? Things like the atmosphere, the oceans, and so on. We need to manage those as commons, as things which everybody benefits from, but also equally, everybody can be very much worse off if we mismanage. We look at human well-being and capability and building human well-being. We look at building sustainable and just economies. We look at food systems and healthy nutrition. We also need to look at how our urban centers are built and planned and implemented. And of course, we need to look at energy, not just making sure that we are trying to provide energy in as clean a way as possible, but also looking very carefully at access to energy and making sure that people have access to energy, because without it, there's no way we can improve their well-being. The other thing we have to bear in mind is that a lot of the problems that we face, and we'll hear more about this later, aren't problems that we can easily find solutions to. By and large, if we know a lot about a problem and everybody agrees on what the sort of outcomes are that we are seeking, those problems have by and large been addressed, and we call those simple problems. We also know that there are plenty of situations where we know a lot about the situation, but we disagree among ourselves about what the correct outcomes should be. And those are complicated problems. We need to work with our stakeholders, build agreements on values so that we can make those problems simple and we can move ahead with them. We know that there are plenty of places where we don't understand the systems because they're too complex, and we need to have more work being done to improve our knowledge about those situations. But we also know that there are many situations where we don't agree on what we want, and we don't know enough about the situation, and those are wicked problems. A lot of the problems that affect human development are wicked problems, and they cannot be solved in the same way that we address simple, complicated, or complex problems. Some workers say that you can't solve a wicked problem at all. The best you can do is tame it. And the problem with wicked problems, though, is you can't ignore them. They're very important, and we need to do something about them. And this is an example of the different kinds of problems that might be wicked or simple or complex. So an example of a simple problem is we know how to fix malaria. All we need are mosquito nets that are treated with insecticide, and we can reduce childhood death from malaria enormously. What we don't have good agreement on is sustainable food systems, how we fight corruption, and how we can transition to inclusive energy. So as an example, let's look at feeding the world. If you remember that the map was completely red because no country on the planet has figured out how to feed all its citizens equitably and properly. If we take our current food production practices and upscale them to meet the demand, the food that we need in 2050, we will destroy the planet. Because our current food systems create major problems in terms of their water use, in terms of the fact that we cut down forests to grow food, and we do all kinds of other things which are just simply unsustainable. So what does that mean? Do we say then we're not going to feed the world? Do we upscale anyway and then hope that we can fix the world after we've destroyed it? Or do we maybe transform our food production practices so that we can feed the world without destroying the planet? The problem is this. At the moment, we still got a lot of hungry people. We've got overweight people. Something like 2 billion people on the planet are overweight, including 40 million children. Pulling it down to the Caribbean, we have very, very high rates of what we call lifestyle diseases. We have the second highest prevalence of things like diabetes outside sub-Saharan Africa. So how do we address that? It doesn't mean in the Caribbean that we don't have enough to eat. It means that we're probably, for most part, not eating the right things. The current system of agriculture is responsible for 80% of the deforestation that humans are carrying out around the world, 29% of our greenhouse gases, and uses about 70% of our fresh water. That's just at the current level, with all those people starving. So if we're going to try and upgrade the system and simply make it more and more of the same, then it can't work. So we need new systems. So we need people to research those systems and come up with better ways of providing food. So one of the things that people say is, well, you know, we shouldn't use milk. We should use almond milk, for example. Well, what's the impact of using almonds? It uses fresh water at very, very high levels. Almond milk may put out less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than dairy milk, but probably uses more water than US dairy methods, at least for the almonds they grow in California, and probably for many almonds that they grow in other parts of the world as well. If we look at soy and tell everybody, well, you know, stop eating hamburgers and use soy burgers instead, or eat soy, well, that's probably about 10% of the loss of Brazilian rainforest. We should be concerned about Brazilian rainforest because my colleagues in Brazil keep reminding me that most of the moisture in the Caribbean comes from their rainforest. So we should be very concerned about cutting it down. A lot of soy is just used actually for animal feed, and then the animals are fed to us. And in some cases, the soy is used for meat substitutes as well. But either way, we need to figure out, well, if we simply increase the amount of soy, are we getting ourselves fed at a higher cost to other things that are important to us? We live in island paradises. Those island paradises have a high dependence on tourism, but we spend very little money conserving or managing our coastal ecosystems. And as a result, we have very high levels of coastal erosion. Somewhere along the line, we need to start looking at this high dependence of tourism, particularly in light of what I'd said before about this whole business of the coral reef tipping point and the likelihood that we may lose anything from 70 to 99% of our coral reefs as the temperatures continue to increase. So we don't manage oceans. We don't manage the global commons particularly well. If it doesn't belong to us individually, then we treat it essentially as if it's infinite. And we use then the oceans as a place to dump our garbage. I've already pointed out that we know for an absolute fact that microplastics are part of the human diet. I've spoken about the coral reef tipping point. Acidification is going to affect not just bony the coral reefs, but it will affect the larval stages of bony fish. It will reduce fish stocks. The way we are warming up the oceans and putting fertilizer into the southern Atlantic means that we're seeing more and more sargassum. And of course, that ends up on Caribbean beaches. And of course, there's coastal erosion. It's not possible to address these wicked and other problems in the way we've traditionally addressed problems, where we sort of call in an expert, the expert comes in and fixes the problem. We need to be more multidisciplinary. We need to start working more and more with people who are experts in a variety of different fields so we can address problems much more holistically. So when we're addressing complex, complicated, and wicked problems, we need to bear in mind that we need to collaborate. We need to collaborate not just between experts of different types, but government, academia, the private sector, and civil society need to start working together much more than they used to. And this is difficult for us very often. Academics don't necessarily like working with government, and government doesn't like necessarily working with academics. Private sector doesn't want to work with any of them, and civil society may not want to work with them either. But if we are going to solve the problems, we must start coming up with much better ways of working together. There are ways that we can do things better. One example is from St. Lucia, and is the example of biofuel, which is being made, sorry, not in the St. Lucia, there's a young person who is making fertilizer from sargassum and selling it commercially, and I believe also exporting it to the United States. But also in Barbados, one of our colleagues, Dr. Legina Henry, is making biofuel from sargassum and rum, and you can visit the website and learn a bit more about that. And you can actually take your car into UWI, get it retrofitted, and you'll be able to use biofuel made from sargassum and rum. We should be concerned, as I said, about life underwater, because we are treating life underwater fairly badly. And just to remind you of the entry points for transformation before we start talking about, well, what can we do about improving where we are? Well, one of the things we might want to do is look at clean meat. This is meat grown in labs. These are 4 different countries, with 4 different companies which are focusing on growing meat without using animals. So Finless Foods focuses on tuna because tuna is a high value crop. Upside Foods works on chicken. Perfect Day makes milk proteins and then provides milk proteins to people who make cheese and ice cream and so on and so forth. And New Harvest focuses on just doing research on how we can create proteins without having to use all the animals that we currently use to create proteins, both for our diet and otherwise. So I'd urge you to go visit Perfect Day and see the sorts of things that they're doing. It's a very innovative company. And what they, among other things, the fact that they make proteins without necessarily using animals, they're able to do it with less energy and less global impact than if you were using animals to produce the milk, the cheese, the ice cream, and so on and so forth. So Perfect Day uses anywhere between 30 and 60% less energy than conventional dairy methods. They put out less carbon, they use a lot less water, and the technology is transferable to developing countries. So this is technology which could be used in SIDS, it could be used in less developed countries and countries all over the world, and would be able to produce good quality milk protein with a lot less environmental impact than our current methods. So when we talk about trying to feed the world, we're not talking about doing more of the same. We're talking about doing things completely differently. And that goes for everything that we are going to be doing if we are going to try to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to measure things differently as well, and we need to measure different things. Remember all those gray countries. Those are countries which don't know enough about what they're doing to be able to figure out how well they're doing in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And we also know that we should be measuring different things as well. You will often hear the development of countries being expressed in terms of things like GDP per capita. And you will hear our politicians talk about, well, GDP increased, et cetera, and our GDP is bigger than it ever was before. It's interesting that they do this. And it's interesting because several Nobel Prize winning economists have said that GDP doesn't actually measure human well-being at all. It simply tells you the size of the economy in which the humans happen to be found. And from back in, I think, maybe 2009, Amartya Sen and Joe Stiglitz put together a paper to brief the Republic of France on better ways of being able to improve human well-being. And one of the things they included was you've got to measure different things. You can't measure GDP and expect to use that to tell you whether or not people are better off than they used to be or worse off than they used to be. Recently, the UN, I think earlier this year, released its multi-dimensional vulnerability index. This is of particular importance to small island developing states because it looks at the sort of immovable aspects of vulnerability and talks about how we, as small states and other states that are vulnerable, how we need to be able to take that into account as we continue to develop and as we try to build resilience, which is essentially trying to figure out how we deal with our vulnerability. But let's also remember that we might want to measure things, as the UN does, the number of people who feel safe walking alone at night in the place where they live. So again, using the text, anybody who feels safe walking around alone at night in the place where they live, just put a yes into the chat. Okay, there are one person. We talk a lot about security, human security, and crime. Not a large number of people saying that they feel safe. Last thing I want to leave you with is to think about resilience. This is a hand-drawn graph, yes, and it's a bit untidy, but hopefully you can follow it. The bottom shows time, and the y-axis is a value. So it could be GDP, or it could be GDP per capita, or it could be human well-being, or government spending, or some measure of how well off we are. And this line shows general progress and improvement of that particular thing. As time goes on, it sort of goes up and down, but generally it's increasing. And then at TE, something bad happens. Let's say it's an earthquake or a Category 5 hurricane or something. Something bad happens, and all of a sudden, as a result of that, what we're measuring drops. So maybe it's the money in your pocket. It drops because a bad event and a disaster has happened. And then after a while, things start to improve again as we start to recover from that disaster. And then at T0, we find ourselves where we were the day before the event happened. And what I'd like you to think about is what happens after T0. Because for a long time, we used to think of recovery as getting back to where you were before the bad thing happened. In other words, T0, where we were the day before the storm hit. But I'd like us to think about this line here, which is basically the line that says, if we continued going along the way we were, this is where we would be. So this line is very important. And when we leave T0, the place where we got to the day before the bad thing happened, we can go in several different directions. We can go along this trajectory, which is the best trajectory, which is that we get back to where we would have been had the event never happened in the first place. So that would mean that we recovered. And that is TR, the place where, or the time when we recover. In other words, we get to where we would have been had the event never occurred. The graph number 2 shows improvement as well, but we don't get back to where we would have been had the event not taken place. This black line shows what typically happens to many poor countries, underdeveloped countries, small island developing states, and southern United States within the United States of America. And I call it running to stay in the same place. So you basically improve a little bit more than where you were the day before, and then things go down again, and then they go up again, and they start to fluctuate about where you were before the event took place. So you're staying in the same place, but it's going up and down. And unfortunately, a lot of countries also go through where we have this red line. So you fluctuate and you go down and then you go up, and then you don't go up to get to where you were before because something else happens. And you never ever get back to where you were the day before the event. So something to think about. How resilient are you? How resilient is your country? How resilient is your community? When something bad happens, or as is typically the case, when a series of bad things happen, because something bad will happen and then something else will happen while you're recovering from the first thing. So there will be a minor earthquake while you're recovering from the major hurricane, or there will be a hurricane while you're recovering from the drought, or something like that, because bad things never stop happening. Do you expect that you live in a resilient enough economy so you can get back to where you were had the event never taken place in the first place? Do you expect to be in a situation where you're delayed, but you're still improving? Or is it that you're going to be forever running to stay in place and remembering the good old days when life was seemingly going to get better and better? Or are you in a situation where you're getting worse and worse because every time you get hit, you take one step forward and 2 steps backward? Couple of things now to just wind up and tell you about responsibilities. My bias is that this is data from the World Bank. It shows very clearly that the Human Development Index seems to be related to the number of years that children stay in school. If we don't build human capital, we cannot grow. And if we don't build human capital, we can't increase our resilience to disasters. Human capital is the single most important part of a nation's wealth. And it's not me saying that, it's the World Bank saying that. Tertiary education is vital for sustainable development. You can't have it without tertiary education. You can't achieve the sustainable development goals without tertiary education. So what are the responsibilities? One, let's make sustainability and well-being a political issue. Every politician should know that if they don't improve sustainability and the well-being of their citizens, they won't be a politician for very long. And we're not talking about just individuals' well-being. You need to look at your community and make sure your community is improving as well as yourself. Individually, we've got to work on sustainability in our own lives, and we should not be afraid to adopt multidisciplinary approaches. Don't expect simple solutions. We've already addressed the simple problems. The problems that remain for human existence are complex, complicated, or wicked. So, for example, no, we can't just stop oil. If we could, we would have done so already. And it's not just because oil companies are very good at their publicity why we think so. Think through, how would you just stop? Can human society just stop eating meat? Can human society stop children from dying from malaria? Yes, we can, but we haven't done so yet. Can we stop children from dying in human conflict? Of course we can, but we're not doing it. So don't think for 1 minute that even when we know how to do something, it's a simple problem. It's not. It's a complex, complicated, or a wicked problem. So be prepared to address the entire problem and not just the symptoms that you seek. And be prepared to put in a lot of time, effort, and work with other people to help to try and address or solve those problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Special thank you to you, Mr. Dr. David Smith, for sharing your knowledge on the SDGs and our responsibility by drawing attention to the 4 major barriers to sustainability, as well as sharing regional examples of how we are affected by the various SDGs. As someone with interest in contributing to the achievement of SDGs, I particularly took note of the fact that we should not be focusing on the goals individually, but as a collective because they are all interlinked. So I know we have gotten a lot of food for thought. So now the floor is open for any questions and comments you may have as participants. Yes, don't be afraid to give a round of applause in the chat for Dr. Smith.
Thank you.
So any comments or questions from forum participants?
Okay, well, I'd like to begin if I may. David, thank you. That was a really powerful presentation. And I'm sure many, I think everyone on this event will be mulling it over for many days to come. One of the things you mentioned was commons, things that we have to work together and collectively solve. What do you think are some of the ones that the Caribbean has to press for and also be involved in for us as a priority? Because I know we kind of.
Sure.
Go ahead.
We could start with the large marine ecosystems. We have several different fisheries which are important. One, for example, the conch fishery in Jamaica. As my colleagues from the Eastern Islands are constantly reminding us that we in the western part of the Caribbean get to eat the larvae that they created, which grew up and became adults and delicious. And yes, we are benefiting from their stewardship, but it's not just there. There's a UN treaty on migratory and straddling fish stocks. We need to manage how different countries allow their citizens to come into other people's waters and fish and so on and so forth. Because no individual is going to be managing this, we often end up in the situation where we see a decline. So a third of global fisheries are not well managed. Now, that's good that 2/3 are, but particularly in the Caribbean, for our own thing, we need to pay way more attention to how we manage the Caribbean Sea, not just our exclusive economic zones or our 200-mile limit, but the entire thing, particularly because none of us stand on our own.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
I will hand over to Ms. Maynard. I see you have your hands up as well, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Global Affairs.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much for that. And I just wanted to say I'm currently at SIDS at the moment. And a number of those issues that you've certainly raised within your presentation has been the subject of intricate discussion by our politicians across the entire region. And I suppose I wanted your opinion, because I'm sure many of our students on here come from different parts of the region. And I just wanted to say that, or invite you to comment on how you feel the alumni and students should be working with their governments, for example, to help push forward this very, very, well, it's an essential, it's beyond important now, it's an essential issue with regards to sustainability.
Yeah, I think the science policy interface is absolutely critical. And by science, I don't mean just the sort of lab type stuff. We're talking about the social sciences, we're talking about the natural sciences and so on. But basing policy and government action and also private sector action on good data, on good information is absolutely vital. Unfortunately, we're not very good at that. And as a scientist, I'll say we're often not very good at communicating to people who work in policy. We sometimes don't understand what they need, and people in policy don't necessarily understand what we are telling them. We do need, and I think the term was coined some time ago, knowledge brokers. The skill of being able to understand what it is that somebody in policy needs, what is the question they need answering, and translating that into a research or other type of question which a scientist can then take and provide the data which gives the answer, and being able to translate back and forth. Now, that's not to say that no scientist is any good at talking to policymakers. There are definitely scientists who are good at that. And there are also policymakers who understand science. But in terms of an organic thing, the way in which the science policy interface has to work in order to make sure that we are actually creating policy that works not on the perception of the problem, but the reality of the problem, we are not there yet. And both the Global Sustainable Development Report of 2019 and the one in 2023, the IPCC reports, and several other of these types of reports, which the UN pulls scientists in to write for policymakers, are good examples of how it should work. But it doesn't always work, especially once you start looking at community problems, where you start working at national problems, and also because science is expensive. And many of our governments can't afford to create the data or to support the science. They say to us, we need data on this. Yeah, well, okay, I need a postgraduate student to go out and collect it. I need a lab to actually do this. And we need people to administer questionnaires. That costs money. And I don't think there are any Caribbean countries who have got a large enough science budget to help solve the problems that they need solved.
Thank you, David, because I was going to say everything you've pointed out here has been one of those things I raised with one. They were critiquing tertiary education today. So I felt the need to step up and speak when we were talking about climate resilience. And I think there is a lack of understanding around the importance of tertiary education in this particular space.
Yep.
And the fact that the reason why that map that you showed was quite scary to see, that in our region there is such little data available. We can't do anything without that data. We can't make plans without that data. We can't know what we're doing. And one of the areas that I think you'd probably agree with is that we in the Caribbean tend to be a tag-on or an add-on to other areas that have very, very different issues within their particular spaces, and particularly because we are small island developing states. And that message is something that has raised its head, and I've certainly made sure it's raised its head a number of times in the panels that I've certainly been in here, one of which I'll be talking about tomorrow. So if you see that I've pinched something from you, please, I will make sure I'll give you the credit.
Okay.
But I just wanted everyone here to really sort of understand that we're all here in a very important space in tertiary education, because many of you here will probably end up being ministers. You may end up in politics. You may end up in very influential positions in which you'll have to be making decisions about where you are placing your resources. And one of the areas that people must understand is that we are falling behind as a region because we don't have the data and we don't have the resources to get that data. And it saddens me in that respect. And I would just ask that those who are here sort of, lobby your governments, talk to them, ask them, why haven't we got data? Because it would take sometimes, it would take a bottom-up approach. It takes you as voters, as parts of the community, to really push for that kind of change and to demand that you understand, that you request the need for that kind of data. And therefore, it will then eventually, hopefully, push the politicians to then invoke our tertiary education institutions to obtaining that. So I just wanted to say, just to support what David was saying in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ruth?
Yes. Ruth, feel free to unmute your mic. I see you have your hands up.
Hello, good night. Firstly, I just want to say, Dr. Smith, tonight's discussion was truly engaging and interesting. I do have some questions to ask, but before I do, I know just now we spoke about the importance of tertiary education when it comes to sustainability, resilience, climate resilience, and being able to have the resources, human resources from our fellow graduates and masters in order to in combating all the issues that we currently face. But I truly believe that before we reach tertiary, I think that our youths, our children from primary school, high school, those are who we need to um, target when creating awareness and interest about sustainability, data collection, all these things that we need. Because when you go into a tertiary level of university, it's sad, but the reality of it is that you need to know exactly what you're going into. And not much people know about sustainability, not much people know about environmental majors and degrees that we could do. What we rather focus on is the mainstream careers like law and medicine and all those things. And of course, I know that sustainability is, of course, part of all the different lifestyles and careers, but I think it's important that we raise the passion and the knowledge of all these important issues with our youth so that they already know that this is something that they'll be interested in when they want to pursue their degree, their master's. But for my question, I would like to ask, what can be done to ensure that the transition to a low carbon economy is equitable to developing countries? And I know that one of the things that I was thinking that we can do is look at case studies from different countries. I know Denmark, if I remember correctly, has done a wonderful green transition. And one of the things we spoke about is the political unity that they had. And of course, the Caribbean has different issues to face when transitioning. So I would like to ask, how can we as a Caribbean go forward with that transition in an equitable manner?
Sure, good question. We do need to look at our energy mix, and there's a lot of technical aspects as well, which we need to look at in terms of the way our electricity grids are set up, both the physical grid and also the legislation that surrounds the use of the grid. So, for example, the monopolies, it's difficult to make money from providing electricity if everybody is in the market. So we've, over the years, had monopolies providing us with electricity. In some cases, those have been monopolies that are mainly government run, and a lot of the infrastructure for energy throughout the Caribbean is old and needs to be replaced. The problem is that that costs money, and we also have probably a set of policies which need to be revamped to take into account the fact that nowadays it's possible, if you have money, to go and buy a bunch of solar panels, stick them on your roof and generate your own electricity. The problem with that is, though, that you need money to do that. And so transitioning to lower carbon, transitioning to less carbon is difficult. It requires a lot more cooperative action between, I would say, governments, and probably is best done at, say, the CARICOM level. And it's by no means a simple thing. If you were going to be just simply opening up the market and allowing people the ability to generate their own electricity and so on, then all that will happen is rich people will be fine and everybody else will be left behind. That's difficult. We also have to bear in mind as well that we are going to be with oil for quite some time. There's no solution out there that will allow us to simply say, okay, we're going to stop using oil in the next decade. It's not going to happen. We can move towards that, but it's not going to happen in the next decade. We are going to need to keep looking at technology, but we also need, probably more than anything else, to focus on efficiency and efficiency in use of energy, and also making sure that we are making sure that everybody has access to energy that is as clean as possible and as cheap as possible. And that might require possibly subsidizing some people. And I'll stop there. I see Michael.
So David, can I just
yeah.
quickly, Ruth raised an issue about secondary education and starting with our young people.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, when I talk, when the discussion's about the focus on tertiary education, it's not to the exclusion of those younger. Yes, I agree with you, Ruth. It should definitely start at a much younger age, moving forward. But the focus is on ensuring we have a number of people moving forward into tertiary education to conduct this kind of work. And we know that the law says you're supposed to be at school until you complete high school, as we term it here in the region. But yes, I agree to engaging younger people from the start. But the main rationale for tertiary is that, of course, we all know that those who finish high school, there's a much lower percentage that then continue on to tertiary education. And what we want to encourage is that number should be going up rather than down.
Right. Absolutely. And as I think I'd mentioned before, the idea of how your human capital increases. Sustainable Development Goal, the idea is no child should be in school for less than a dozen years. Every child should have at least 12 years of education. You should note that there are Caribbean countries where that does not happen. And that's the minimum, 12 years. We really want children to be in an education institution for probably something closer to 17 years if we want to see us hitting the kinds of lives that we would all like to have, that we would be happy, that we would have years of good life, that et cetera, et cetera. All right. Michael?
Yes, good night. The question I'd like to ask is, are the targets set by the various Caribbean countries to mitigate the impact of climate change realistic and are achievable?
That's a good question. Are they realistic or achievable? The targets for the Sustainable Development Goals were set by the UN, and we all had a voice in that, at least our countries did. The targets that will be set over the conference that's taking place in Antigua and Barbuda now will be set, of course, again through a UN process. At one time, if you'd asked that question, I think before COVID, most people would have said they will be difficult to reach, but many of them are reachable. I suspect that we will now say, well, because of COVID, no, that's not possible. But if we don't set the targets ambitiously, we probably never will reach them. The problem is not so much the targets, it's that if we try to reach them by business as usual or by simply doing more of the same or increasing what we're doing so far, we will probably not reach those targets. What we need to do is transform what we're doing and do things that in different ways, do things differently, rather than continuing to do things in the way that we've been doing so far. And that is difficult it's difficult for governments, it's difficult for private sector, it's difficult for communities.
Yes. We also have a question in the chat from Taisha Emmanuel. She says the decisions made today are going to impact generations to come. My questions are, how can young people get involved to help combat the pressing issues in our region? And what avenues are available to young people to be a part of decision making to help inform decisions and promote the SDGs?
Definitely there are organizations on campus which people could be part of, and if there aren't, then create one. Get involved at your youth club or community groups, groups at church, groups in all, and start making these issues something that is discussed. Don't feel, for example, that because a church youth group is tied to religion, that it is not about the Sustainable Development Goals. It very much is. I've had discussions with the Lord Bishop of Jamaica about the Sustainable Development Goals because he was very, very concerned about the way they affect the well-being of his congregation and other people who are not part of his congregation. So get involved in the existing groups, create new groups if necessary, make sure that you get involved in jobs that can be part of the whole business of sustainable development. It's difficult for me to figure out how you could be employed and in no way be related to any of those 17 goals. So
Yeah.
even if your job isn't about sustainable development in the title, it's definitely going to be about decent work. It's going to be about innovation, industry, and so on. Those are goals as well. So check back, look at those goals. All of them are applicable to every aspect of your life. And the main thing is become involved. A lot of the people who I knew as, you know, who ended up as politicians and people working in all kinds of areas started out being in the guild of undergraduates or
Yeah.
you know, another one I remember, he was very much involved when the campus at Mona was locked down because the government at the time decided to increase the cess on students in terms of, and so basically things happened. People, you know, were vocal and did things and made sure that their elected representatives knew where they stood. So at home, at the university, at education, and in your job. And if the opportunity isn't there, get a few people together and start, you know, posting on social media and getting something done.
I was going to say I can assist a little bit on this as well, because first and foremost, of course, we're here talking about responsible futures. It's an avenue for change. There are a number of other areas. So, for example, the university is currently, it's a new venture, I should say, that we are working with, and I'm sure that Celia will share. We were working with our South to South University Cooperation Network. And I will obviously be sharing a little bit more about that with you. We're just in the institutional kickoff. That is something supported with the United Nations. There are also other international organizations that are working. So things like the Economic and Social Council have a youth forum very much focused, and they held their forum in April of this year, very much focused around young people and the sustainable goals, looking at things from well-being and so forth. So there are also a number of young people who have attended here at SIDS in their contribution to the regional or regional development. So we do have that, but we can certainly assist you if there is a group that you want to form. If you want to have a focus on that group in relation to your community, for example, and David's absolutely right. You can do something at church, you can do something within your community. And if you wanted to link that into the work you're doing here at the university, that is something that we would encourage participation in. And all of the actions, certainly, that we will be doing as part of things like Responsible Futures and the South to South Cooperation Network, we will certainly want to know about those things, and we will be very open to seeing what expertise we can supply to help you with the guidance of making sure that that group is going to be, like we said, successful and sustainable. So, you know, all you have to do, who asked the question, all you have to do is simply come and ask. You know, you can literally, if you need to, you can email my office and we can really look at how we can support activities that you want to put together in that sense.
Wonderful. And if I could also just jump in to add to what Sandria just said, Responsible Futures, as both David and Sandria have highlighted, is designed to make people think about sustainability in their daily lives. And I mentioned in my brief presentation that the directors of student services across the UWI are wanting to, they're very happy to have a framework under which to work, to put their clubs and societies, which mainly are volunteer and service groups, which are very innovative and focus on all kinds of things, whether it be to alleviate poverty or to enable gender inequality to be decreased, etc. And so, as they have both said, You can use existing groups on campus, existing groups in your communities. And also, I would just like to encourage everyone here on this event to understand that young people have a voice and that you need to find avenues and pathways to make your voice heard. After listening to the various things that we are all going to be coming up against in the future, you definitely deserve a future that is bright and with us as least challenges possible in terms of your living and lifestyle. So you cannot be apathetic. You need to be involved. You need to find ways to make a difference and create a responsible future.
Yes, I noticed Taisha has a hand up. You can go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to everyone who responded. And I think it's important to note, because most times we as young people come into events and, we talk about the issues we are facing. However, the persons that are presenting don't show how we can get involved. Currently, I was at the Global Children and Youth Action Summit, and I was the convener for that of the Caribbean region, as well as I am the chair of the United Nations Youth Advisory Group, Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean. So one of my main commitments for this year as well is to ensure that young people's voices are heard, especially when it comes to that of decision making, regardless of their age and that of gender. So I just wanted to note, what resources are there, as well as what avenues we can utilize, etc. And you all have done an excellent job in answering. And therefore, I look forward to further collaboration in knowing that there are persons we can reach out to as well as collaborate with.
Thank you.
Yes, Ruth, I noticed you had your hand up and your questions were answered in the chats. So thank you for your questions. Any other comments or questions from the room? Okay. If not, thank you so much for all your questions. As we draw close, let me just, on behalf of the UWI Global Campus and especially the Disaster Mitigation and Climate Change Committee, it is my privilege and honor to extend heartfelt gratitude to all who have contributed to the success of this evening's SDG 101 Forum 2.0. After the successful execution of the SDG 101 Forum during UWI Week last year, the Disaster Mitigation and Climate Change Committee of the UWI Global Campus decided to host a second edition aiming to contribute to the goal of the Responsible Futures Initiative. As the common saying goes, when it's nice, do it twice. And the purpose of today's forum was to provide an educational and interactive space for individuals to gain a fundamental understanding of the Responsible Futures initiatives and how it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals, and also to gain further insights on our theme, understanding the Sustainable Development Goals and our responsibility. I can confidently say we did just that with the support of all those who made it possible. I would like to express our profound gratitude to Mrs. Celia Davidson Francis, founder and coordinator of UWI Ambassadorial Corps and Regional Director of UWI Responsible Futures, for your insightful presentation on the Responsible Futures Initiative, which has provided us with a clear understanding of how sustainability is being promoted here at UWI. For this second edition of the SDG 101 Forum, we wanted to be able to highlight the work of the Responsible Futures Initiative here at the University of the West Indies. So we are happy that you were able to provide practical ways in which UWI students can get involved in achieving the 17 SDGs through the Responsible Futures perspective. It was also interesting to note the challenges throughout this Responsible Futures journey, including budget, financing, and coordination, so to inspire ways of mitigating those challenges amongst those present here this evening. A special expression of gratitude is extended to our distinguished speaker, Dr. David Smith, as your expert insights on sustainable development have not only enlightened us, but have also inspired us to integrate these crucial concepts into our daily lives and work. Dr. Smith, you have reminded and enlightened us of the fact that we are at a point where taking action towards achieving the SDGs is no longer just a choice, it's a responsibility. Thank you for painting a clear and honest picture of the grave reality, really, of where we are at globally in achieving the SDGs. We were also reminded of the importance of data collection on a regional level, as many of the small island developing states are data deficient in terms of tracking our SDGs achievements progress. So the knowledge shared throughout your engaging presentation has inspired us to become SDG action advocates in our fields of study and to take action in our communities, households, and wider community. So thank you for enlightening us on what exactly our responsibility is in the context of fulfilling the 17 SDGs. Your dedication and expertise are greatly appreciated. We are also immensely grateful to Mr. Joshua Bishop for sharing the campus alumni officer's support for the responsible futures. Special thanks to the UWI Start ambassadors who created the compelling videos on the significance of sustainability in their field and the Responsible Futures Initiative. Your voices has resonated with us and have underscored the importance of student involvement in these global efforts. Thank you to UWI Start Global Campus Ambassador President, Mrs. Erica Clover-Joseph, for officially opening this activity with your welcome remarks. Special thanks to the Global Campus Officer for Alumni Relations, Mrs. Sandra Griffith-Carrington, and her assistant, Mr. Joshua Bishop, who worked tirelessly to ensure that our events maintain the excellent standard of the University of the West Indies. Furthermore, we must acknowledge and give special recognition to our resident technician, Mr. Sherwin Reed, who goes beyond the call of duty to assist us for these virtual events. A big thank you to our participants, the UWI Start ambassadors, executives of cross-campus clubs, executives of youth and service organizations, faculty, staff, and students of the UWI, and SDG advocates and enthusiasts. Your active participation and engagement has truly been the heart of this forum. The questions raised and the ideas shared during this forum have truly enriched our understanding and underscored the collective commitments to sustainable development goals. As we conclude this SDG 101 Forum 2.0, let us carry forward the knowledge and inspiration we have gained here today. May we all be ambassadors of change, spreading awareness and taking action towards achieving the SDGs. Let us remember that our efforts, no matter how small, can create a ripple effect that contributes to a more sustainable and responsible future. Thank you once again to everyone for your invaluable contributions and for making this event an impactful one. We look forward to seeing the positive impacts that will emerge from our collective efforts. Thank you all and have a wonderful night and peaceful rest. And for those driving, please drive home and get home safely. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you again, David and Sandria, for coming. Appreciate everyone for being here and hope that, as Christiana says, it will have a big ripple effect. The knowledge you imparted, David, certainly shall.